Hello and welcome. My name is Trismegistus, and today we're going to be reading through and speculating about the latest Factorio Friday Facts. Friday Facts 394, Assembler Flipping and Circuit Control, posted by Kovarex and Josh. Hello, let me show you another dose of things we just can't stop ourselves from doing. Assembling Machine Circuit Control, by Kovarex. Being able to change the recipe of an assembling machine using circuit networks is an obvious feature, and we considered it in the past. The idea was always postponed as we didn't see an easy way to solve the problem of potentially having unrelated items to deal with when the recipe was changed. But the solution is actually pretty easy. We just create a special dump inventory in the assembling machine and put the extra items there. When they got screen capture of the GUI, the caption says, assembling machine controlled to produce wooden chests right after it was producing electronic circuits. They actually explain these settings, so we'll discuss them later, but basically you can see an assembler here that's been recipe changed to produce boxes, having done circuits, so the inventory it had was a bunch of copper wire and iron plates where it was making green circuits before. And the idea is that when it changes this recipe automatically, normally the items would dump out into your inventory, but instead they create this temporary dump inventory for the items in there. They explain a little bit later that basically these will go as soon as, they're not kept. So if you've got an inserter or something like that that's taking these out of this assembler, I don't know if it prioritises from the left or anything, but basically it will slowly empty out these items. So this isn't like a way of cheat storing a load of stuff. The dump inventory is right next to the products and can be removed from the assembling machine in the same way as the normal products. This means you have to be careful when creating designs which use the circuit network to set recipes, as you must ensure that you handle the leftover item output. Another important part about setting the recipe is that it will only check the set recipe signal when it finishes crafting, so it won't cancel any in-progress crafts, and you don't have to worry about precise timing. In other words, if it was halfway through crafting the green circuit, it would continue that craft, finish it, and then check whether the recipe request has been changed. So it's not going to get that recipe change halfway through. You can actually do that manually, so halfway through a craft you can change the recipe and it'll dump the old items out, etc. But it won't even check. So it's not even going to check this set recipe until it's finished a craft that it's working on, which is a nice solution, I think. Once we figured out how to handle setting the recipe, we could easily add some more utilities. Firstly is enable, disable, simple on-off switch like a lot of circuit controls. Okay, so that's the enable, disable there. It doesn't say this, but it's actually got the same condition on it, so you can get it to be enabled or disabled based on a particular condition. So it's not a very good example, but you might have a line of assemblers and they'll only maybe you only turn them on, a bit like when you have accumulators and you do a very simple circuit and they're controlling a steam array, and basically you have the steam array switch on when the accumulator charge goes below 10%. And this might be a similar example, that you have a whole row of assembly machines that are doing cogs, for example, but you only switch them on as the demand grows. So once the demand gets above 10 items, above 20, above 50, you add more and more gears into the system. I say it's not a very good example because you probably just switch the recipe on other machines, but yeah, that's the type of thing that would enable you to do. Set recipe. Set the recipe of the assembler based on the incoming signals, which is just that there. So toggle the signal coming in for the wire will set the recipe. Read ingredients outputs the ingredients and count required for the current recipe. So if you tick that, that'll be putting a request out into the system. And you can imagine then, as it'll show in a minute, there's a whole complex circuit network way of doing it. But if you're putting a thing out saying read ingredients, and it puts out for green circuit, iron plate and copper wire, then another machine could, for example, pick that up. Read recipe finished, a one-tick signal emitted when a crafting cycle completes, which is this one here, read recipe finished. It's also got a control signal on it. I don't know what it outputs if it doesn't have that control signal, or maybe you have to set it. But basically this is what it puts out when it's finished the recipe. And another crude, rubbish example, you'll have to forgive me a bit on this one. I'm not very good on circuit networks. I mean, I'm okay with them. But I just don't, it tends to be an area of the game that I don't mess with because if you've ever watched one of my playthroughs, they're a bit sort of brute force. I just, build more and more and more rather than do fancy circuit network things. But the example I thought of here was that if you wanted a speaker to sound, once you had crafted your rocket silo, for example, you're building your rocket silo and you're just like, well, I want to go away and do stuff. It's got to import all of this concrete and what have you. Just give me a signal when you're done. Then it could do that. But you could do a lot of more complicated things. This could trigger, say you're crafting assemblers or something, and you want to do something really dynamic where once it's crafted an assembler, then it switches over or switches other machines on. And there is an example coming here with a very limited number of assembly machines doing all sorts of complicated recipes. So that's the type of thing you could do. You could do a signal, right? I've crafted that cog that you wanted. Now tell me what to do next, or something like that. Last one then is read working. Outputs a signal continuously while the assembler is crafting. There you go. So read working, and the control signal is what it puts out. I guess the point there really is that it's on while the assembler is crafting. So you could use it to say, is this assembler idle? If that signal drops, if that signal goes, then you know that the machine is not crafting anymore, and you might want some system where it is continuously crafting. All these things together should make it possible to make more generic assembler setups for those who like to dig into the automation of automation. We've then got a GIF of this playing through. So the caption says, a generic assembler setup configured to craft high quality inserters from raw ingredients. Now I'm going to be honest, I'm not that good with circuit networks. So there's a lot going on here that I would need to really chug through and work through. There is obviously a really complicated array of maths going on here, We can't see what the actual alt is on these for some reason. Well, you can enable that, can't you? Whether it shows you that alt as well. But basically, as you can see, there's all sorts of maths type equations going on here. Logic equations, really, of saying multiply this by that, and if there's any of them, and greater than this and less than that. All sorts of stuff going on there. So we've got some of the newer combinators. And it appears to have a signal, unless I'm being very, very dumb, of Q, which I don't think we know what is. This was the Friday Facts where they introduced this new I keep calling it assembler, combinator. Explained that it had these 5 symbols, and we can see one of those, and I don't quite understand why, because it's the question mark one. Where was the question mark one? So you got a question mark here. That's meant to be a random signal. So I'm not sure why that would be part of this matrix. Again, we're getting into the territory of my complete ignorance over... Well, not complete ignorance, but my lack of familiarity with combinators. Said it right that time. But basically, yeah, so that Q signal, I don't know what it is. I mean, unless it is literally the Q, Q as a thing, but that's not an option of what we would be able to set. So it looks like they might have added something there. I mean, it would make sense as like, a queue, because this thing is meant to be a selector combinator, so it allows you to sort of pick things out of lists and stuff like that. So outputting the full queue of items would make sense as an option. But yes, so whatever's fundamentally happening here, the point is that this is a setup that's designed to make quality inserters. So I don't know if you remember, we saw this setup with quality, where it's sort of chunking through items and trying to make quality circuits in this case. I guess this is the circuit network equivalent of that. So this is the one saying, how you do it with circuit networks. And you can actually see, it's trying to craft a tier 3 fast inserter and various quality items that you'd need to make inserters, red circuits and green circuits and regular inserters and, looks like long-handed inserters as well. I'm just trying to see if there's any cheeky little Easter eggs of a random item that we've not seen before, but I couldn't see any when I was watching this through before. But yeah, it's basically just resetting. The point is, it's resetting the recipes in order to build those. And it's clearly using, what's in this logistic system in order to do that. So it's basically saying, right, have we got any quality level 3 inserters? No, let's make some. And then they go into another box. And then when you've got some, that signal means that, yes, we've now got level 3 quality inserters. let's now make a level 4 quality inserter using that level 3. You know, do you know what I mean? It's sort of that type of logic is what I'm assuming is going on here. You can see all sorts of different quality level items coming in and out of boxes. And I'd say this is presumably the circuit network version of this bad boy. Flipping for Real by Josh. With the release of version 1.1, blueprint flipping was introduced, allowing you to flip a whole set of items horizontally or vertically before placing them. It came with some caveats, however. Many buildings with fluid inputs and outputs couldn't be flipped, which was really annoying. For most entities in the game, flipping them is simple. Mirror their position about the centre of the blueprint, then rotate 180 degrees if necessary, since if something is facing northwards, then flipping horizontally has no effect on the direction. Repeat this for every item in a blueprint and you've got yourself a flipped blueprint. There are some interesting caveats to this, like undergrounds, which you rarely want to actually turn around, since now the outputs will be facing each other, and instead you generally want to just reverse the direction their belts travel. Splitters also need input and output priorities flipping. The flipped splitters in this image have opposite priorities. The left splitter has its priority as left, and the right has its priority as right, to achieve the same effect of prioritizing items from the north. So that's basically, because when you flip, it's a different idea to rotate, basically. So when you rotate these, these have left-right orientation, basically. So the north here is actually the left, and the north here is actually the right, because it has directional relevance, basically. So if something is going in a particular direction, then left and right is a relative thing to that direction. If you were to be rotated, it would stay in your left hand. If you somehow flipped, I don't know how to demonstrate that, but if you were suddenly flipped, so your left and right exchange, suddenly that would become your right hand. I guess it's mirrors, isn't it? If you're looking in a mirror, then it changes, but if you rotate, it doesn't change. There are some more complex cases that just don't work with this rotation method and therefore have to be blocked for now, like oil refineries. If you ask to flip a refinery, the blueprint will block you because it just doesn't make sense. There's no way to rotate a refinery into a flipped state. At best, your fluid setup wouldn't work. At worst, you would now be mixing fluids like this. Notice the steam pipes now lead to the oil inputs on the copied refinery. So that's a bit weirdly explained, because I know what they're saying. If I was to try and flip this oil refinery in the pure case that flipping works, then you could just mirror this and it would be exactly the mirror. That steam, if it was literally mirrored, if it was flipped, could easily become that, there as well. So it would stay still connected to the right thing. And it's only because of how the code is implemented that it doesn't work. I've just spent ages trying to puzzle this through, because the phrasing of this didn't quite make sense to me. What they're talking about is the blueprint version of flipping, essentially. So if this is an entire blueprint, when you flip it over, what they're actually doing is they're accounting for that distance change. So this item, say this is the center point of the blueprint. I don't know exactly where it would be, but say this entire thing was blueprinted. Then what they're doing to flip it is taking that and putting it over there. So the flip is like an entire entity flip that they're talking about, like entire blueprint flip, rather than just flipping the entity. So in other words, this is on the right-hand side over here, it's on the left-hand side over here. So it's not just the directional thing they're talking about, it's the position relative to everything else in the blueprint. And the rotation, I assume, is because of a north-south flip rather than an east-west flip. In other words, if you flip some things like an assembler, it doesn't have a mirror image model in the game. An assembler is always just an assembler looking like an assembler, whether you rotate it or not. But it has, for example, fluid connections on it. So when you rotate it, those fluid connections, go around the assembler. When you flip it, the fluid connection needs to move from the left to the right if you're doing that type of flip, or it needs to move from north to south if you're doing that type of flip. And of course, the code isn't doing that. The code is saying, right, well, this piece of belt needs to move to that side, move over to that side of the belt. I also need to rotate it by 180 degrees. So it goes from being a left to right belt to a right to left belt. This one here, I don't need to rotate it because I just need to move it over. It's always still a north-south belt, yeah? If you're doing the glip, so the vertical one, then you would have the same thing. So this would become a north-south, or a north, it would go from a north to south to a south to north belt. That's what they're talking about. So then an assembler, for example, the connection, if you're doing the left-right, that flip, horizontal flip, it doesn't rotate because it just goes, the exact same model just moves over to there. And there is no mirror image of an assembler, as I say. It's always just an assembler. But if it's going north-south, then you need to do a double rotate. Yeah, so you need to take it from there to there physically. But of course the connection is now on the south because it doesn't have a mirror image in the game. So you need to rotate twice. So you need to hit R twice to get it to be north. Yeah, so basically it's just a quick workaround version to get flipping to work rather than implementing proper flipping of the items. They're not actually flipping an assembler. They're moving it and then double rotating it to get the connection on the other side. I never really thought about that. Again, I've massively over-explained something, but there you go. I couldn't make these videos short. I have to make them an hour long. Yes, and that's why we can't have rotation of fluid buildings, because it's not really doing rotation. What it's doing is it's moving it to the right position for a rotated blueprint, and then only if it's doing the whole, directional change thing is it actually rotating it. So there is no model in the game that has the reversed inputs and outputs. It's not simply a case of moving that to there, because that's not how the model is set up in the game. So you can't exchange them. It will always keep the same orientation of, inputs and output connection points. So when you flip it, it's wrong. Wow. The only proper solution is to flip for real. Actually flip the building about an axis to produce a mirrored result so the inputs and outputs are where you might expect them to be. This is easier said than done though. The pipes still have to line up with the connection points on the building itself, or we end up in even weirder territory of fluids going into walls. There needs to be limits on how buildings could flip. I know a lot of mods do have, side entries and outputs and all sorts of things like that. So the basic point was, if you flipped it like that, it might end up with the wall being connected rather than so this side bit or something was connected. After a lot of doodling on graph paper to visualize all the options, I ended up only allowing buildings to flip over their line of symmetry. So all inputs and outputs would still match once flipped. If a building doesn't have any symmetry, it still can't be flipped, as there's nowhere for the pipe to go on the other side of the building, looking at you, pump jack. Oh, there we go, that's the example. So a pump jack, tanks would be another example of it. When you rotate a pump jack, the output doesn't rotate, so it just flips between two options. And so I never understood why the heck they did that. So you can I don't know which way around it is, but basically if it's on the right hand side, is when you rotate it, what'll end up is it becomes at the left hand side. So you rotate and then it's at the top. I say tanks are a better example. Storage tanks, where you've got the circular tank and the outputs are on the corners, and then when you rotate it they move, so they're on the corners again. So if you flip that, the things would change position relative to each other, and so you might end up with a pipe that tries to go into the into a bit of the thing. But they could have just changed it. They could have made them rotationally symmetrical. The oil refinery has horizontal symmetry, so you can flip all the coordinates of the inputs and outputs over the vertical axis and still land on a usable pipe connection. Those of you who remember your high school geometry will realise that to perform a vertical flip, you can mirror horizontally, then perform a 180-degree rotation to get the same result, which is what they've just explained and what I've just crunched through in my head, I think. So every building only needs one line of symmetry to be mirrored and can then be rotated to suit. With the pipe connections mirrored, the fluid inputs and outputs now match what the flipped side setup needs. But basically they're saying that you only need two versions of it, and then the other one is just a rotation, when you go through the geometry. So in other words, that is the opposite of that, is the opposite of that and that and that, and now that is the opposite of that. But basically that is that. So you've got steam pipe on the right, heavy oil on the left. If you think about that rotated, that's still on the left, that's still on the right. So that is just rotationally that, even though you could do it by going through flipping, basically. And of course the same with that. That is exactly the same as that. It's just that it's rotated. The available symmetry for each building is detected automatically when the game loads, so mods can make use of this feature without changing anything too. If their buildings have symmetry of their fluid connections, they can be flipped. So I could finally tidy up some of the fluids on my space exploration playthrough. That's when I stumbled into the final boss. This is the space manufactory from the space exploration mod. It has 12 pipe connections and only diagonal symmetry. It had me back to pen and paper, scratching at corners of my brain I haven't used for a while. Flipping over a diagonal doesn't just move the position, it also rotates by 90 degrees, throwing all of my current code that could reliably just rotate 100 degrees. After some mild weeping, I began reworking large chunks of code to take into account a direction adjustment when diagonal symmetry was in play. Eventually it worked again and I could bask in nice, clean, back-to-back mirrored builds. Now that flipping is working on all buildings and items, we decided it was worth expanding that to everywhere you might want to flip something, not just when holding a blueprint. The examples given are hovering over a building and pressing F or G, so that's literally you want to flip the building. At the moment, you can rotate it. Flipping something in your hand before placing it, so you're just holding it and you can press F and G. I thought that was possible already, maybe I'm just wrong, but I thought you could flip them already. When copy and pasting from one machine to another, though this won't change the direction, just the flip nature of the pipe connections. In this way, flipping becomes a first-class operation alongside things like rotate, in that you should be able to use it anywhere that feels natural and have it do a sensible thing. So if you've been wondering why this matters, why this is a thing and why it's important, then this really shows you, I think, because this type of thing is going to be really nice. Basically, because at the moment it's really complicated to set this type of thing up, because you have to offset them basically, and you have to do extra pipe connections, and you have to really think about it, because if you look, that should be a heavy oil, that should be a light oil, and that should be a petroleum, and so they would be mixed fluids, and even when you punt it two over, you end up with effectively that being a petroleum, that being a light oil, so it isn't matched, and that being a heavy oil, so it isn't matched. So you'd end up doing things where you offset them and you do connecting pipes and weird workaround pipes, or you just end up with like multiple rows, and it's just really space saving and really naff. Because what you can do with this, if you think about it, is if you move these further apart, you can then put nice lines of beacons in and get more overlap bonus basically. I mean, you lose one side of it, but you always lose one side of it anyway, really, unless you do undergrounds to take it out. If you're just doing a normal array type of thing, then beacons would only one beacon can hit it. If you basically, if you imagine that top one, you can fit a beacon in there, and that's kind of all you can do, unless you say go for a completely radically different design. But even with this, if you imagine you did put, beacons around them, you could have the pipes coming out. You just have one row, one nice neat row where you don't have to do any mad connections or wibbles in the joints of just the pipes going down the middle, and then you've got beacons, then you have oil refineries, beacons on the bottom, oil refineries, and you've got max coverage of beacons and no, stupid messy pipes. So this is going to be awesome, basically. It's a really, really nice change. Stack versus bulk inserter by Clonan. After last week's Friday Facts, there was a lot of discussion about the naming of stack inserters and bulk inserters. In short, it makes no sense that stack inserters don't stack items on belts, and bulk inserters do stack items on belts. And we tend to agree. Normally we try not to change too much when we are adding a new feature, but in this case it just makes it too confusing. So in 2.0, stack inserters will be renamed to bulk inserters, and the new inserter, which can place stacks of items on belts, would take the name of stack inserter. I think we all saw that coming, really. I don't know why they didn't twig it to start with. I guess, it is the point, and I did make this in my video, I think, basically saying that if you start renaming things, then people couldn't get confused very easily and just go, wait, what's that now? Why is that now called that? Why is that different? But I think because the functional meaning of the names, I think that's perfectly fine. I'm sure there'll be hundreds of hours of me playing it through, calling the bulk inserter a stack inserter. I can't wait for that confusion. As always, flip your thoughts onto us at the usual places. Thoughts then. It's another one where there's not a lot of speculation, if you see what I mean. I am looking forward to the ability to set up combinators as like having multiple, like having proper logic in them. And I said this when these combinators came on. So these things of having actual like proper logic conditions on it for a single combinator, rather than having to do something like this where you chain together 20 different combinators, which would always just confuse the heck out of me, and I'd get the wires mixed up and all that sort of stuff. This is the big change that I'm really looking forward to with logic and combinators, etc., because this is probably, beyond me a bit in terms of setting it up. I could probably code something like this if you wanted me to do it, and that's why I'm hoping maybe I'll get to be able to do this sort of thing, because, I can code, not very well, but I can code. So getting these set up so that it's got proper conditions in them, rather than just one little logic check in a single combinator, means that I might be able to attempt things like this. In reality, though, my problem always, and this isn't a criticism of the system itself. I think it's brilliant, and it's great that it's there, and people do amazing things with it. My problem with it is it's like a Rolls-Royce solution usually for something where you could just take the bus. And I'm the take the bus. I just brute force my way through a lot of problems, rather than sitting down and working out a super duper complex, clever system. I'll just build 1,000 machines making, level 3 inserters, basically. And that's fine. That's one of the reasons I love Factorio. There's loads of ways of doing the same thing. And I am hoping that because of this logic change system, I will be able to play a bit more with it, because I just can't. It just gets too ridiculously complicated for me personally. That the number of certain combinators you have to set up just to do something simple. I am curious for one thing as to why there's the random signal in this, but also in particular what this queue is. Maybe I'm just being dumb and it is on there. Maybe it was talked about in a later one and I just didn't see it or something, or I'd seen it but didn't remember it. But I don't remember what the queue's for. But yeah, it's a nice little addition, for those who are into that sort of thing. The flipping is awesome. It's very... Flipping's a sort of a swear... Well, it's not a swear word, but it's sort of an exclamation in British English. So if you'd say flipping heck or flipping hell, that would be... It's not swearing, but it's just an explanation. So whenever you do these things where you're saying flipping a lot, it just ends up being like you're going, oh, flipping this and flipping that. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to the flip thing, because I get why it was never there, because they were doing this cheat basically of doing positional translation and then just rotation if it needed it, and that's why we couldn't get these, because the actual model of a reversed pipe was not in there. One of the things that I do think on this, one of the things I got a question on, is the train station and signals. Does that now mean we can flip train stations and signals? And would that make sense as to why? Because they're always on the right hand side of... I'd have to play it through. They're always on the right hand side of the track, aren't they? Train stations. So if you do a thing where you positionally move it, say it's at the top and it's on the right hand side, and you flip that, or you clip it rather, to the bottom, and then it rotates it, it doesn't work, does it? Because it's on the right-hand side. So the actual object is sat on the right-hand side, and that explains signals as well. So you've got the track there, right? If your operation is move and then rotate, and you're going from north, it's a north end to the south end, so it's locked on, it's lump on the side of the track basically. When you do the rotational thing, it becomes that way round, which is fine. But then when you rotate it, all you're going to do is rotate it. So it then becomes unattached to the track. It doesn't have a logic at the moment for going, right, well, it's on the right-hand side of the track, because it's a thing on the right-hand side. It's not just shown on the right. It's an actual thing. So it flips, and then it's on the left-hand side, and you try and rotate it. So actually it moves round rather than going onto this side. So that explains train tracks as well. But that would be my next big question on this. Now that flipping and clipping and works, as you'd expect, that it's actually rotationally changing it, or it's not, they're still using a little bit of a cheat, but it's actually moving it around. Will train tracks be flippable? Because that's their big flaw at the moment with blueprints, is it's a real pain to get signalled trains to move. I think, I'm going back and forth on rail signals, but it'd be good for them to clarify whether that means rail flipping is fixed. And this, I mean, even if it isn't, this is what I'm really looking forward to, being able to put machines opposite each other, because it happens with every fluid machine. They misalign. You can sort of work around it with chemical plants because there's only the two outputs, but it just can be nice to put down a row on each side and flip them, and then that you can just cross connect them basically without any problems. And particularly input side, you put the inputs on, oil when you're doing cracking or what have you, you can just put them on and they you flip them or clip them or whatever, and they just all line up as they should do. So a nice little quality of life change. I hope you enjoyed today's Friday Facts and you might consider coming back for another one. If you want to chat about the latest Factorio Friday Facts, then you can find me live streaming Factorio every Saturday on my Twitch channel, Trismegistus. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Blueprint.